Hello, and welcome to Dreamy Tales, a cozy nook where you can gently unwind and drift into a peaceful night's rest. Tonight, we're sharing another soothing story, one that can help settle your mind and foster a feeling of quiet calm. But first, let's take a moment to prepare our bodies and minds for a tranquil, rejuvenating sleep. Settle in comfortably, and with each slow inhale and gentle exhale, allow the day's worries to gradually fade away. It can be challenging to pull away from the day's busyness, particularly as bedtime approaches. Yet remember, the less we stress over falling asleep quickly, the easier it becomes for our minds to release any tension. Let the gentle rhythm of your breath carry off lingering concerns, and let tonight's story be your guide toward deep relaxation. Now, make yourself comfortable and let the warmth of Dreamy Tales envelop you. Enjoy the story, and may you find a restful, peaceful slumber here in our little nighttime sanctuary. Once, there was a merchant named Laurent who had invested his entire fortune in a fleet of ships, only to see them lost to the depths of the ocean. As a widower, he did not have to share this devastating news with a wife, but he did have 6 children who were used to a life of comfort and luxury. When the creditors came calling and word spread that the family had fallen into poverty, the news hit them hard. With each day that passed without any sign of the ships, Laurent found himself compelled to sell their fine possessions, furniture, their carriage, and even his daughter's beautiful jewelry and elegant dresses. They had to leave their grand home behind and relocate to a humble cottage on the outskirts of town. Laurent often ventured out in search of investors and partners to help restore his business. Meanwhile, his 3 sons and 3 daughters, mostly grown but lacking practical skills, were left to manage the household. While the older siblings struggled with their new circumstances, Camille, the youngest daughter, embraced her responsibilities with enthusiasm, learning how to run a home without any servants. Well liked by everyone in the village, Camille sought guidance from her neighbors on baking, sewing, gardening, and taking care of chickens. Her eagerness to learn and her diligent work ethic endeared her to the villagers, who grew quite fond of her. Over time, she became the glue that held Laurent's family together. As her older siblings wrestled with their new way of life, Camille ensured that their home remained tidy and that meals were prepared on time. Nearly 2 years into this new routine, Laurent received joyful news. One of his lost ships had returned to port with most of its cargo safe and sound. The family rejoiced at this unexpected blessing. While her older siblings were eager to abandon their simple life among the villagers, Camille found joy in their cozy cottage with its tidy garden and the warm aroma of freshly baked bread wafting through the air. Although she was delighted to see her family happy again, she felt uncertain about returning to their previous life of indulgence. She had discovered a newfound sense of fulfillment in being helpful and appreciated. To reclaim his property, Laurent embarked on a horseback journey to the port, a trek that would span several days. Once he arrived, he could orchestrate the distribution of his recovered riches and arrange for a comfortable carriage for his return. Eagerly anticipating their improved fortunes, he asked each of his children what gift they wished for from the city. The older siblings excitedly requested lavish items, silk shoes adorned with sparkling buckles, intricately decorated hats, luxurious velvet capes, plush bears, and shimmering jewels. Amidst their chatter, Camille remained quiet, lost in thought about her own desired treasure. When her father encouraged her to share her wish, she hesitated for a moment before replying, "Father, I have always dreamed of seeing a rose. They don't bloom in our area and are quite rare and expensive." She yearned for just one rose in any color that pleased her heart. Laurent chuckled at his youngest child's unique wish, but readily agreed to fulfill it. In secret, he decided to surprise her with a beautiful necklace or another trinket to accompany the flower. On the morning of his departure, the weather was delightful. Camille took great care in packing his saddlebag with provisions for the journey and bid him farewell with a bittersweet smile glistening with unshed tears. The other children were more indifferent, accustomed to their father's travels, and fixated solely on the gifts they would receive upon his return. As Laurent rode away along the sunlit forest path, Camille stood alone outside their cottage until he disappeared from view. A peculiar sense of unease washed over her, yet she chose to keep it to herself. After all, their fortunes seemed to be on the upswing. While Laurent's children waited patiently at home, he made steady progress toward the port city, filled with hope of reclaiming his fortune and status. It was true that he had endured significant losses. However, with the cargo aboard the ship, he envisioned starting anew, perhaps even establishing a fleet of ships in time. His mind danced with dreams of spices, silks, and other treasures he could import in the days ahead. Thus, it was devastating for him when he finally arrived, only to find his hopes dashed into pieces. The ship had indeed returned, bringing with it the majority of its cargo. However, word of Laurent's fortunate haul spread quickly, compelling his many creditors to act without delay. By the time he arrived to reclaim his belongings, they had already been distributed to settle his numerous debts. Despite his attempts to negotiate extensions on his sizable bills with various merchants, he found no success. As night fell, Laurent stood free of debt, but entirely empty-handed. There was no money left for him to invest or for the gifts he had promised his family. Feeling utterly disheartened, he decided against staying in the city for even a single night. Without properly preparing for the journey ahead, neglecting provisions, weather considerations, or sending word in advance, Laurent mounted his weary horse and rode away from the city, following the provincial road that had led him to the port that very morning. A few hours into his journey, darkness enveloped him as a storm swept in. Lightning flashed and thunder roared all around, while fierce winds tore branches from trees. Startled by the tempest, Laurent's horse bolted off the main road and carried him into an unfamiliar forest. Realizing too late how unwise it was to travel at such an hour, Laurent began searching through the howling wind for any kind of shelter, a cave or refuge from the storm. He lost track of time as his horse wandered through the raging gale until finally a tall stone wall loomed before him. Urging his horse onward, he hoped it led to a place where he could find safety. As they approached the ominous wall, he discovered it surrounded an estate rather than a home. Before him stood a grand iron gate slightly ajar. With little time for politeness, Laurent dismounted and pushed open the heavy gate to guide his horse through. Together, they slowly advanced along a paved path that faded into the swirling darkness ahead. Leaves whipped around them and rain lashed at him from every direction as Laurent strained to see through the oppressive gloom. At last, a magnificent structure emerged before him. It was indeed a mansion of great stature. Though his sight was somewhat limited, he could discern that the place had a majestic entrance and numerous spacious rooms adorned with tall windows. It felt quite daunting for anyone to arrive here uninvited, yet he found himself with no alternative. The thought of spending the night exposed to the elements filled him with dread. He needed a roof over his head. After securing his horse in a sheltered nook, he approached the imposing front door and lifted the heavy iron knocker. When it fell, its sound reverberated through the gloom, echoing like distant thunder. When no one answered his knock, he inhaled deeply and pushed against the door with all his strength. To his surprise, it creaked open, and he stumbled forward into a grand entryway. For a moment, Laurent lay on the cold stone floor, taking a moment to catch his breath in the eerie quiet. He could still hear the rain pelting against the front steps through the narrow gap of the tall door, and felt grateful that he had managed to find shelter for his horse. As he rose in the dim light, he took in his surroundings. He stood in an opulent reception area, where a sweeping staircase curved gracefully on either side. Suits of armor stood vigil in various corners. Before him loomed a set of intricately carved double doors. The silence within the house was profound, so still that one could almost hear a pin drop. Yet a gentle glow filtered through the cracks of the doors ahead. After making several tentative attempts to call out into the stillness, he finally gathered his courage and approached the softly lit room, pushing the doors open slowly. Stepping inside, he surveyed the inviting space. A roaring fire danced in a grand hearth, while a table set for one showcased a modest selection of dishes alongside a carafe and a large glass. His gaze wandered around the cozy room, taking note of plush chairs and tables scattered with books, creating an atmosphere of warmth and welcome amidst the storm outside. Yet, there was no sign of the homeowner. Laurent awkwardly settled into one of the cozy armchairs, pausing for a moment. The delicious meal spread out before him proved irresistible, and he found himself drawn to the warm loaf of bread and the enticing aroma of roasted meat. As time ticked by, without any appearance from anyone, his stomach rumbled audibly, compelling him to give in to his hunger. He took a seat at the table and began with a slice of bread, gradually indulging in the entire feast at a leisurely pace. An hour drifted by in peaceful silence, leading him to believe that the owner was away, perhaps seeking shelter from the storm elsewhere. Savoring a generous sip of the delightful drink in his glass, he eagerly polished off the rest of his dinner. Convinced that the homeowner was absent, Laurent reassured himself that he could explain his presence come morning. After finishing every morsel of food, he reclined contentedly in his chair, emptying the carafe. The crackling fire wrapped him in warmth as he drained the last drop from his glass and pulled out the letter regarding his recovered cargo ship from his pocket. Once filled with hope, his dreams had now faded into nothingness. Unconsciously pushing the letter aside on the table, he surrendered to a deep slumber. Throughout the night, he slept soundly without dreams. When morning arrived and he awoke, it took him a moment to gather his bearings. The fire had long since died down, and remnants of last night's meal still lingered on the table. It appeared that the homeowner had yet to return. Feeling a wave of embarrassment for having intruded into someone else's home, discomfort washed over him. Rather than wait for the homeowner's arrival, Laurent decided to leave quietly and quickly, justifying that the untouched dinner would have gone to waste anyway. He rose from his chair and crossed the room to open the double doors. Soft light filtered into the entryway, illuminating the stark hallway more clearly than it had been during the previous night. As he stepped cautiously into the foyer, it felt like walking on eggshells among the watchful suits of armor lining the walls. He half expected them to spring to life and block his path. Taking in the sight of grand twin staircases adorned with worn ornate carpet runners, he couldn't shake off the feeling that this place had been uninhabited for quite some time. As he approached the grand front door, he grasped the handles firmly and summoned all his strength to slowly pull it open, unveiling a misty courtyard beyond. After slipping through the threshold and gently closing the door behind him, he adjusted his waistcoat, striving to regain his composure. Although a sense of unease washed over him for leaving the imposing mansion like a thief in the night, he resolved to put this embarrassing chapter behind him. Making his way back to the alcove where his horse had been tied the night before, relief flooded over him as he found her in good spirits. He reached into his saddlebag and retrieved an apple, a leftover from Camilo's provisions, and offered it to the grateful creature. Untethering the horse, he led her quietly along the stone path he had navigated in the blustery darkness just hours earlier. A glance over his shoulder revealed the mansion looming ominously as daylight began to break. The expansive chateau was long and rectangular, with a central section flanked by matching wings on either side. Its tall, narrow windows lined both floors in an orderly fashion, seemingly gazing down upon him. The grand structure was crowned with a thickly chimneyed roof of sloping tiles that added to its imposing presence. Turning his focus away from the formidable estate, he guided the horse toward the front gate, taking in the wild gardens that sprawled on either side. As he neared the end of the pathway, he spotted a charmingly untamed pergola draped with rose bushes. At the heart of a circular seating area stood a rose bush, adorned with some of the most exquisite pink blooms he had ever encountered. Remembering his promise to Camille, his youngest daughter, he felt compelled to keep his word. With a knife from his bag in hand, he eagerly began snipping the delicate roses from their home, determined to collect them all as a symbol of his commitment. Engrossed in this task, he was oblivious to the footsteps drawing near. It wasn't until he stepped back from the now bare bush that an unsettling feeling crept over him. He sensed someone watching. Turning around, he was met by a stern gaze belonging to a rugged figure. Though resembling a man at first glance, this being was distinguished by an unruly mane of facial hair and an unusually tall and muscular build. Caught off guard, and appearing disheveled and hastily thrown on linen shirt and breeches, this figure radiated anger. "What do you think you're doing?" he growled, his voice low and menacing like a wolf's. Laurent stood there paralyzed, acutely aware of the bouquet clutched tightly in his left hand. He stumbled over his words, explaining that he had thought the house was empty and that the roses would go unnoticed. Noticing the man's unyielding glare, he weakly added that he had promised roses to his daughter. The man in the linen shirt, exuding an air of authority, remained silent for a moment, as if weighing his next words carefully. With a commanding presence, he proclaimed, "You have taken advantage of my hospitality without consent. You feasted and rested here, something I was willing to overlook. However, by robbing my beloved rosebush of its blooms, you have crossed a line. Each flower is dear to me and irreplaceable. You must find a way to make amends for this loss." Hearing this, Laurent felt despair wash over him. He shook his head in defeat, confessing that he had nothing to offer in return. The stern host regarded him with icy resolve. "Then you will need to work off your debt," he declared firmly. "I am in need of laborers at my estate." Laurent stared back at him, desperate for another option. "But, sir," he pleaded, "I have 6 children waiting for me at home. I cannot remain here. What will happen to them?" The man's expression did not soften. "You either work to repay what you owe, or someone from your family must take your place," he insisted. "Take your roses. They are of no use to me now," he continued coldly. "Return to your family and make arrangements. I expect either you or a substitute within a week. If you fail to comply, there will be consequences." With that final word, the stern man turned on his heel and strode away without a backward glance. Laurent watched him disappear into the chateau, realizing he had no choice but to go home and prepare his children for his absence. Perhaps once the man calmed down, he would allow Laurent to be free from this obligation. As he rode home at a steady yet slow pace, thoughts swirled in his mind about how he'd break the news to his family. Despite the beautiful day, the mist lifting and sunshine pouring down, his heart felt heavy with worry about what lay ahead. He arrived home late that night, greeted by eager faces filled with anticipation. After all, they were expecting gifts from their father's journey. As he opened and closed his saddlebags, they playfully reached in search of the treasures he'd promised them. With a heavy heart, he instead presented each child with a single rose. Camille took hers first and inhaled its sweet fragrance with delight, marveling at its beauty. But soon enough, his other 5 children clamored for their real presents instead. That evening, gathered around the bustling kitchen table, Laurent shared with his children the tale of his unfortunate journey to the port city. He recounted how he had lost his remaining fortune and the events that had led him to owe a debt to the enigmatic owner of the chateau. When Laurent revealed that he would need to return and work off this debt, his 5 eldest children frowned, voicing their concerns about how they would manage without him. Camille, however, remained quiet. She sat at the table with a thoughtful expression that was hard to decipher. Finally, she called for attention, surprising her siblings since she rarely voiced her opinions. Camille boldly declared that she would take her father's place at the chateau. Tears welled in Laurent's eyes as he protested vehemently against such an idea. Yet Camille's logical arguments were hard to dispute. Their father was essential at home to support the family. She, on the other hand, could be spared. With some skills in household chores, she assured them that she could handle whatever cleaning or cooking awaited her. Ultimately, she concluded there was no other viable solution. She would be the one to work off their family's debt. Over the next couple of days, Camille prepared her simple belongings for her journey. As the rose her father had gifted her began to fade, she pressed it between the pages of a book to preserve it. This would serve as a reminder of why she was leaving everything familiar behind to work for a daunting stranger in a far-off estate. Though nervous about departing from all she had known, Camille was resolute in her desire to make her father proud. The morning of Camille's departure arrived bright and sunny. She and Laurent loaded her belongings into a small cart, which they hitched to their loyal mare. The chateau lay 2 days' travel away with a horse pulling their cart. Laurent knew of an inn where they could rest for the night along their route. Her 4 remaining siblings gathered outside their cottage to bid them farewell. Among them lingered a blend of relief and unspoken admiration. They were grateful not to be left alone for too long. The journey was solemn for both Laurent and Camille. The pleasant weather lasted through their first day, and their night spent at an inn passed without incident. The second day of their journey unfolded with a gusty chill, hinting at the arrival of autumn in the forest. Brown leaves, the first to surrender to the season, danced along their path while the wind whistled playfully through the trees. Their steadfast mare trotted along the road, steadily drawing them closer to a bittersweet farewell. As Laurent spotted the turnoff from the main road that led to the chateau, a weight settled heavier in his heart with each passing moment. Sensing her father's sorrow, Camille gathered her courage and offered him a warm smile. "Do not worry, father," she reassured him gently. "I am strong. I will take care of things." He nodded, clinging to hope that her words would ring true. Soon they arrived at the gloomy entrance of the estate. Laurent recognized that their time had come. He pushed open the gate once more, guiding their horse through as they approached the imposing mansion for a second visit. Camille stared in awe at what lay before her. The grand yet tangled gardens and the towering, uninviting walls of the house were unlike anything she had ever encountered. It was both daunting and captivating in its stark beauty. Having grown up in a humble village, Camille found herself speechless before the sheer enormity of it all, feeling an overwhelming sense of mystery and permanence enveloping her. The very stones appeared to be in a deep slumber, as if waiting patiently for someone to uncover their secrets. She contemplated the tasks that awaited her inside those walls, hoping they would be within her reach. As Laurent halted the horse and cart at the wide front steps, he braced himself against a wind that seemed determined to steer them away from this entrance. Together they climbed slowly up the steps. Laurent lifted the heavy door knocker and let it fall with a resounding thud. Father and daughter stood there on the steps, waiting for the stern master of the house to appear. To their surprise, when the door creaked open, it revealed a boy who looked about 13 years old, dressed simply in village clothing. He peered out at them with genuine curiosity before nodding as if satisfied by their presence. "Are one of you here to be the new servant?" he asked inquisitively. Laurent was taken aback for a moment, but explained that he had brought his daughter Camille to work off his debt in his stead. The boy nodded knowingly, as if this was entirely anticipated, and opened the door wider, inviting her inside with a gesture. With that, the voice scurried away into the dim corners of the house, likely to announce that the new servant awaited with the breeze at her back. Camille stepped through the threshold and into her new existence. It was a bittersweet farewell for both Laurent and Camille, yet they donned brave smiles. The loyal mare turned towards home, the heavy clouds pressing down upon them, not glancing back until they had passed through the chateau's gates. Then the swaying trees of the forest enveloped them. Camille stood hesitantly in the echoing hallway. The gray light of the overcast day filtered in through tall windows above the door, but it did little to instill a sense of warmth. She stifled a shiver and moved closer to the trunk that contained her belongings. She reminded herself to gather her courage and do her utmost. Moments later, a boy dashed back into the hall and informed her that the Baron had instructed him to show her to her room. With that, he cheerfully hoisted her trunk and began hauling it up the grand curving staircase. Camille followed him, taken aback that they were ascending rather than descending into a kitchen or lower chamber. Perhaps she would be staying in an attic. To her astonishment, the boy veered down the first magnificent hallway as they traversed the richly carpeted east wing of the chateau. Their quiet footsteps echoed past portraits of noble figures from long ago, as if these painted ancestors were permanent residents observing this unexpected visitor with curiosity. So captivated by their gazes was Camille that she nearly bumped into the boy when he finally halted before a door and pushed it open. Stepping inside after him, Camille was greeted by a sight that took her breath away. The most exquisitely appointed bedroom she had ever seen. It wasn't excessively large, nor were its furnishings extravagant. However, the canopied bed, fine fabrics, and rich wooden accents exuded luxury. As she took in her surroundings, spotting a cozy window seat and a small dressing table, the boy announced his intentions and set about lighting a fire in the grate. Once it crackled warmly to life, he dusted off his hands and flashed her a grin. "I'm Gabriel," he said enthusiastically. "I help out around here for the Baron with various tasks. I'm really glad you've arrived. It can get quite lonely sometimes, and I could use some assistance with daily chores." Camille hesitated for a moment before replying. While she was curious about what those daily tasks entailed, she simply thanked him for starting the fire and inquired when she might meet her new employer. Gabriel gently conveyed that the Baron had mentioned he would meet with her the following day to discuss her responsibilities. For now, the lad would bring her a modest supper, hoping she would find rest throughout the night. With that, as swiftly as he had entered, Gabriel departed, quietly closing the door behind him. Camille took a moment to gather her thoughts before beginning to unpack her belongings. She hung her garments neatly in the spacious wardrobe and carefully placed her few treasured books on a side table beside the bed. As she opened one of the volumes, she discovered a delicate pink rose tucked between its pages, which brought a wistful smile to her lips. After closing the book and setting it aside, she wandered over to the window, drew back the heavy drapes, and sank into the soft cushions of the window seat. From this vantage point, she had an enchanting view of the courtyard, where wild gardens sprawled along winding paths and up the stone walls of the chateau. Dusk was settling in, and a gentle breeze stirred debris across the cobblestones, creating small whirlwinds that danced about. Dark clouds hurried past the rising moon, exhausted from her journey and overwhelmed by her new surroundings. Camille soon found herself drifting off to sleep amidst the comforting embrace of the curtains. A soft knock at her door stirred her from slumber. Untangling herself from the cozy nook of the window seat, she took a deep breath before opening the door to discover a tray waiting outside, holding a simple meal of bread, cheese, soup, and steaming tea. Glancing down the empty hallway confirmed that no one was around. Gabrielle certainly knew how to move quietly. She brought the tray inside and set it on a small table near the crackling fireplace. Starving after her travels, she savored every bite of her meal. Skipping any elaborate bedtime rituals, she pulled back the coverlet and slipped into the warm cocoon of sheets and pillows before quickly surrendering to sleep. Throughout the night, Camille found herself in strange dreams. She imagined wandering through dimly lit corridors of the chateau while following a large dog that seemed to vanish into various rooms only to reappear moments later in the hallway. Eager to catch up with it, she reached a doorway where it had just disappeared. Peering inside, instead of finding a dog, she saw only a man's back as he sat at a desk. Just as he began to turn his chair toward her, she jolted awake. Sitting up in bed, she noticed that the fire had dwindled to embers and sunlight was streaming through her window. As her initial bewilderment faded, a gentle knock echoed at her door. Standing there was Gabriel, balancing a tray in his hands. "Good morning, Miss Mila," he said with polite warmth. "I've brought you some breakfast." He gestured vaguely toward the entrance and added, "The Baron would like to see you in his study once you've finished." Camille nodded at the young boy, accepted the tray with gratitude, and watched as he slipped away once more. An hour later, Camille found herself standing anxiously before the very door where her father had once enjoyed his secret dinner by the fireside. She could hear the sound of papers rustling from within. Taking a deep breath, she cleared her throat and tapped lightly on the door. The noises ceased abruptly, followed by the scrape of a chair against the floor. Moments later, a man with an abundance of facial hair appeared. His features were quite pronounced, and carried an air of discontent that made him appear rather intimidating. Nevertheless, Camille composed herself and offered a polite nod in greeting. The imposing man scrutinized her for a moment before returning her gesture with a reluctant nod of his own. He then motioned for her to take a seat in a chair near the fire. With a heavy sigh, he settled into the armchair across from her. "Understand that you will be the one to settle your father's debt," he stated. "Are you acquainted with basic household chores like cleaning and cooking?" Camille nodded, affirming her experience. The man seemed satisfied with her response. He picked up a hefty ring of keys from a nearby table. "As you can see, I am quite short on assistance here," he explained. "Gabriel takes care of my essential needs. His mother supplies me with bread, milk, and eggs daily, while he runs errands in town. However, there is no one else to oversee the estate besides me. You can surely see that just by looking around. It's still too much work for just you and Gabriel, but we will manage." He paused, as if expecting a response. Camille was taken aback at the thought of being the sole housekeeper in such a vast mansion, but she felt it was pointless to voice her concerns. The man continued, "These keys will unlock most rooms in the house, though many of them are rarely needed. If you require anything that Gabriel cannot fetch for you, please let me know. Otherwise, I prefer that you make as many decisions about the household as you wish. I usually spend my time in my study or the library." Overwhelmed by the weight of the responsibility he was placing on her shoulders, Camille could only nod, signaling that their conversation had concluded. He stood up abruptly. Camille rose from her chair, accepted the ancient-looking keys from him, and nodded once more. As she turned to leave the room, he called after her. "Dinner is at 7 p.m., and it would be wise for you to join me in the dining room." Camille bobbed her head in acknowledgement, thanked him softly, and exited the study. Standing somewhat dazed in the echoing front hall, she felt both lost within its vastness and as though it were closing in around her. She spread the heavy keys across her open palm and gazed at them thoughtfully. Though she did not know what doors they unlocked, they radiated a quiet sense of authority. Her contemplation was interrupted when she noticed Gabriel stepping out from the shadows. With a bright grin directed at her, he asked if she would like a tour. Gratefully accepting his offer, Camille embarked on her adventure as the housekeeper of the chateau. What Camille discovered was that the employer lived in solitude, having done so for many years, largely because of his intimidating demeanor that instilled fear in the locals. They whispered unkind tales and treated him with disdain whenever he ventured into public. However, Gabriel was the sole individual who maintained a connection between him and the outside world. He had initially begun running errands for the Baron many years ago, but over time he grew to admire and value the man hidden behind that unapproachable exterior. He reassured Camille that the Baron's bark was indeed worse than his bite. Each day, Gabriel dedicated himself to looking after the needs of the house, returning to his family's modest home on the town's outskirts at night. "Honestly, miss," he insisted earnestly, "the Baron is a just and compassionate soul." Gabriel then led Camille through the vast expanse of rooms and corridors within the chateau, much of which had fallen into disrepair. The dim hallways were lined with unused bedrooms cloaked in dust covers. The fireplaces lay cold and silent, while some rooms had remained untouched for decades or even centuries. In those forgotten spaces, furniture and belongings were piled high, shrouded in cobwebs. The windows struggled to let in any light from outside, obscured by layers of grime that had settled over time. As Camille explored her surroundings, she quickly realized that only a handful of rooms were used on a daily basis, and it was her task to clean and organize them. These included the kitchen, the Baron's study, and the front entryway. Yet the most breathtaking room of all was the library. Gabriel kindly permitted Camille to sneak a glance inside while the Baron was otherwise occupied, and she was left in awe by what she beheld. Before her lay an expansive room with soaring ceilings adorned with golden accents. Towering bookcases stretched up to the very top, lining every wall except for where the windows graced the space. Rolling ladders stood at either end of the room, poised to glide along the shelves and grant access to any book within reach. Countless volumes awaited her curiosity, their spines showcasing a rainbow of colors: crimson, forest green, navy blue, and rich brown, each one inviting her to pick it up and dive into its pages. Camille, who had cherished the few books available to her during her father's financial struggles, had never encountered such an extraordinary collection before. Gabriel mentioned that the Baron spent much of his time here, and it certainly appeared so. Throughout this lavish sanctuary, tables were scattered with books open to various pages or stacked in groups, while well-loved leather armchairs seemed to whisper tales of long hours spent immersed in their weighty contents. Gabriel gravely informed her that he was responsible for keeping the fire crackling in the grate during daylight hours. Camille imagined what it would feel like to open one of those many tomes and sink into a soft chair, breathing in the intoxicating aroma of aged paper infused with ink. It was truly enchanting. She understood that if she wanted to make progress in this neglected house, she needed to simply choose a spot and get started. On her first day, she joined forces with Gabriel to dust off and freshen up the front hall, while also tidying up the kitchen. For quite some time now, Gabriel and the Baron had been preparing simple meals in there. However, much of the kitchen still required care. Though Camille wasn't a master chef by any means, she delighted in restoring the kitchen's gleam. She sent Gabriel into town with a shopping list in hand. Then, in the grand yet quiet kitchen, she rolled up her sleeves. Countertops were cleared of dust. Pots and pans shone brightly once more, and slowly but surely, the once cold and empty space began to pulse with life again. By the time dinner came around with the Baron at her side, Camille had prepared a modest meal of roasted chicken. It wasn't extravagant by any stretch of imagination, but she felt a swell of pride as they sat down together to enjoy it. With little time to prepare, Camille hurried back to her room. Gabriel had rekindled the fire, and she quickly refreshed herself at her washstand before slipping into her finest gown. As she approached the window to close the curtains for the night, she paused to look out into the enveloping darkness. The courtyard was still, as if holding its breath in anticipation. Not a single creature stirred. Even the birds were silent. The grounds seemed wrapped in a thick blanket of tranquility. With a gentle sigh, she drew the velvet curtains closed and reluctantly turned away from the window. There was so much left to uncover about this place, she thought. Lighting a candle, she ventured down the dimly lit hallway and descended the broad staircase, arriving at the tall dining room doors. The space was exceptionally grand for just two diners. It had likely seen its share of dazzling celebrations and lavish dinners. As she gazed upward, Camille admired the shimmering crystal chandelier that hung above like a canopy of stars. At one end of the long table, Gabriel had set two places, and dinner awaited her. She was the first to arrive, but not for long. The Baron's imposing figure soon appeared awkwardly in the doorway. He paused for a moment and offered a brief nod of acknowledgement. He then gestured toward the two place settings, inviting her to take a seat. Camille settled comfortably into one of the plush chairs. "I see you and Gabriel have been quite busy today," remarked the Baron, raising his eyebrows at the hearty meal laid out before them. "He has borne a heavy burden as my sole assistant these past years. I am glad you will be here to help lighten his load." Camille nodded, unsure how to respond. "You are my lord?" She hesitated. When he shook his head with a smile, he replied, "Please, just call me Antoine." He added with a hint of humor in his voice, "I am lord of nothing now. Just this chateau and its collection of dusty relics." Looking into her eyes, he gently said, "I'm truly sorry for the situation that has led you here, but I hope you can find some solace. I aim to be fair, and I am delighted to have your company." Camille nodded and offered a brief smile. "Would you like me to organize the library tomorrow?" she asked. "I wasn't certain if you wanted me to go in." After a moment's reflection, the Baron agreed, giving his approval. He then added, "Please feel free to borrow any book that catches your interest from the library." As Descartes wisely noted, reading great books is like having conversations with the greatest minds of history. You'll find my library is quite remarkable, filled with every book you can imagine. It's rather enchanting in that way. Surprised by his kind gesture and cultured manner, Camille watched her somewhat melancholic employer as he enjoyed his meal. Having been at the chateau for just a day, her view of her situation had already begun to change. She now found herself in charge of a splendid estate with the freedom to work as she wished, and she had just been granted access to an extraordinary library. Perhaps this unexpected turn of events wouldn't be as dismal as she had initially feared. Lost in thought over her plate amidst the flickering firelight, she heard nothing but the gentle clinking of silverware against china. Throughout dinner, Camille and the Baron shared few words, finishing their meal in respectful silence. Later that night, as she nestled comfortably beneath the crisp white sheets of her opulent canopy bed, Camille felt a sense of hopefulness. This secluded estate held many fascinating secrets waiting to be discovered, and she eagerly looked forward to uncovering them in time. Rolling onto her side, she sleepily admired the tightly drawn drapes that blocked out the darkness beyond her window. Inside the chateau, a warm flame flickered softly, casting a comforting glow. The next day, after tidying up the kitchen, Camille cautiously made her way to the library. Knowing that the Baron was busy in his study, she seized the chance to explore the magnificent collection of books under the pretense of cleaning. With a duster in hand, she carefully moved around the shelves and tables, tending to surfaces that had long been neglected by dust. Just as she was about to shift a stack of books, Antoine appeared at the doorway. "Kindly avoid disturbing any of the stacks or opening any books," he gently requested. Camille, realizing her mistake, took a step back from the pile she had inadvertently touched. "There's no need to say sorry," he comforted her. "I completely understand that it might seem a bit untidy. I'm in the midst of some research and would hate to lose my spot." He then asked her if she had chosen a book for herself. She replied that she hadn't and requested any recommendations he might have. Camille admitted that she felt unworthy of truly understanding such profound literature, given her less formal education compared to his. Antoine smiled warmly, gesturing broadly as he said, "Acknowledging one's own ignorance is the first step toward gaining wisdom." Seeing her confusion, he winked playfully and added that this wise thought was attributed to Socrates. He crossed the room, retrieved a small book from a lower shelf, and handed it to her with care. "Perhaps you would enjoy some of his other reflections." He believed deeply in the importance of asking questions. Camille accepted the book with a grateful nod. Just as she was about to leave the room, she paused and indicated that she did have a question after all. "Is it possible for me to hire some villagers to tidy up the gardens before winter?" she asked. Antoine looked at her with a hint of sadness in his eyes and shrugged gently. "If Gabrielle can find anyone willing to come onto the estate, you are welcome to do so. Unfortunately, most people are reluctant to enter the chateau grounds due to the strange stories that have circulated about me over the years, leaving me rather isolated." Camille frowned at this revelation. "How do you cope with it? Doesn't it anger you to be treated so unfairly?" Le Baron looked down thoughtfully and replied, "I was once a more charming yet vain and foolish man. It took a significant misfortune for me to realize my errors and understand the disdain people hold for me now. Perhaps this is merely retribution for my past mistakes." Camille fell silent then, choosing not to ask any further questions that day, but feeling determined to learn more about how her employer had found himself in such unfortunate circumstances. For now, she looked forward to exploring Socrates' writings in her room after dinner. As time passed, Camille quickly adapted to her new role as the housekeeper of the chateau, and even began to cherish it. With some persuasion, she managed to convince Gabrielle to hire a few local men who came one day and cleared away years of neglect from the gardens. This was done only after Camille had given them strict instructions not to harm the rose bush near the pergola, which had been planted by Antoine's mother and held deep sentimental value for him. She nearly regretted inviting the men from the village into her home when she overheard their unkind words about Antoine. "He's an absolute monster," one of them declared loudly to his companion. "He lives like a beast in there," another chimed in. with no manners and unworthy of human company, but I'll gladly take his money, he finished crudely. Camille caught sight of Antoine by the window, listening intently to their cruel remarks. She rushed to close it, eager to protect him from their harshness. He waved her away, appearing unaffected. "I'm used to this sort of talk," he said calmly. "It's been many years since I've been able to engage with society." Camille felt a wave of frustration wash over her as she asked, "How can you stand such injustice? They don't even know you. How can you not despise them?" He simply shrugged, his gaze drifting to a pile of books on a nearby table. A brilliant English playwright named William Shakespeare once wrote, "There is no furnace so hot for your foe that it does not burn yourself by nurturing goodwill for these ignorant souls. I lighten my own burden by doing so." With a gentle smile and a nod toward Camille, he added, "You might enjoy reading Shakespeare yourself. His plays are truly remarkable." Then he returned to his books, leaving Camille to reflect on his words in the gloomy day outside. Despite the heavy workload that awaited her each day, Camille still carved out moments to explore the house. As autumn settled in with its crisp air, early twilight, and chilly nights, she would meander through the corridors with a candle in hand, using her hefty ring of keys to unlock the many closed doors that lined the hallways. Most rooms turned out to be bedrooms, suggesting that this grand chateau had once welcomed numerous esteemed guests from the nobility. Covered in dust sheets, each shadowy room unveiled elegant four-poster beds, fine furnishings, and chairs draped in dusty fabric. One day, she stumbled upon what appeared to be a particularly special chamber. Unlike the others, it was clearly a lady's boudoir and still held remnants of her presence. A delicate dressing table was adorned with jars of powder and sparkling perfume bottles glistening in the afternoon light. Nearby stood elaborate wigs from bygone eras on their own stands, as if patiently awaiting an extravagant ball. As Camille opened the wardrobe, she was taken aback by a stunning array of silk dresses from the pre-Revolution era. She delicately traced her fingers along their fragile skirts, almost afraid that her touch might cause them to crumble. Imagining the graceful woman who had once donned these garments, the room seemed to pulse with echoes of the past. When she explored the chest of drawers, she found it brimming with sparkling necklaces. Nestled within a small velvet box was a ring embellished with a shimmering sapphire. Camille carefully closed the container, ensuring she didn't give off the impression of thievery. With a sense of longing, she stepped out of the room and locked it behind her. It felt like a portal to brighter days, and was undoubtedly the most breathtaking sight she had encountered in the house. Camille faithfully penned letters to her father, which Gabriel would take to town during his errands. In these letters, she reassured him that she was being well cared for and enjoyed her tasks. Eventually, she even began sending him some money. After her first month, the Baron informed her that he could not allow her to work without compensation, since she had more than repaid the damage done to the rose bush. He expressed his wish for her to remain, and offered her a weekly salary for her contributions, which Camille gladly accepted. As Antoine's housekeeper, she felt as though she had discovered her true purpose. Her organizational talents flourished, and the delightful company and access to his remarkable library became her greatest sources of happiness. Though Antoine was often deemed unattractive, nothing about him had changed, except that Camille took care to ensure his clothing was neat and presentable. Occasionally, in passing or during conversations, she would catch a glimpse of an ordinary handsome man in the mirror. At those moments, he appeared less rugged and his features seemed more balanced. Yet after blinking and refocusing, she would find herself staring at the same fearsome visage as before. It felt as if the dark magic of the chateau was playing tricks on her perception. With a hint of wry humor, she observed that now and then a beggar would knock at their door, blissfully unaware of the estate's infamous reputation in her village. Typically, beggars were turned away and seldom received any aid. The townspeople's attitude suggested they believed those in poverty deserved their fate, while industrious individuals did not end up in such unfortunate situations. Camille had expected Antoine to send them away, but to her astonishment, he asked her to give him the lovely coins before they left. Intrigued, Camille couldn't help but ask why he was being so generous, particularly since no one around him had shown him any kindness. Once again, he quoted a philosopher he admired, Aristotle, saying, "A truly great-hearted person asks for nothing in return, but is always ready to extend kindness to others." With a hint of regret in his voice, he added, "I must strive to become a more generous man because my past actions have led me to this downfall." Although Camille was eager to learn more about his story, she couldn't pry any additional information from him at that moment. Still yearning for understanding, she hoped for another opportunity. Later that evening, as they sat together in the softly lit dining room enjoying a warm winter stew, Camille found the courage to ask Antoine about his loneliness in the chateau. After a brief pause filled with contemplation, Antoine let out a heavy sigh. He leaned back in his chair, took a sip of his drink, and began to share his tale. "Years ago," he recounted slowly, "I lived here with my mother. After my father passed away when I was just a child, I inherited the lordship of this estate. My mother was a radiant soul who spread joy and kindness wherever she went. She tended lovingly to the rose bush that your father plundered of its blooms." Antoine hesitated for a moment, clearly uncomfortable with the memories, before continuing. "When my mother fell ill and eventually passed away, I found myself alone and unprepared for the world. Regrettably, I did not rise to meet my responsibilities. Young and foolish, I squandered our family's fortune on trivial luxuries and extravagant celebrations. I neglected the estate itself, allowed debts to pile up unpaid, and treated my staff poorly. Without my mother's guidance by my side, I descended into a life of excess that held no value for anyone, least of all myself." He paused again before pressing on with his story. "One night, during one such lavish party," he recalled somberly, "a servant came to me with news of a woman at our door seeking food and charity. Caught up in the revelry of the evening, I callously dismissed her request and instructed my servant to tell her to look for work elsewhere, but before he could usher her away, she pushed her way inside and foretold that my pride would lead me to ruin, cursing me with solitude and lovelessness until I learned compassion and sought redemption. With a furrowed brow, Camille pondered, humanity? What could she possibly mean by that? Antoine simply shrugged in response. That is the riddle that has haunted me for years. Even with access to a vast library brimming with the insights of philosophers, mathematicians, and poets, I remain ensnared in my curse. My knowledge expands, yet the collective wisdom of humanity has yet to illuminate a path to my liberation. Camille studied him from her seat at the table. The gentle crackling of the fire filled the stillness around them, and she imagined him sitting alone before many fires over the years without anyone to share his thoughts. She contemplated how long he had been confined in this solitary haven, leafing through countless volumes in search of redemption. Antoine flashed a bright smile to dispel the lingering awkwardness. Ah, well, he remarked cheerfully, as the great Isaac Newton once said, to arrive at the simplest truth requires years of contemplation. Perhaps one day I will discover the answer nestled quietly on her bed that night. In that moment, Camille felt as if she had finally pieced together a puzzle. All these years, Antoine had dedicated himself to studying, reflecting, absorbing knowledge, and seeking forgiveness. He was no longer a man who would turn away kindness from even those deemed unworthy. Yet she couldn't help but wonder what else lay ahead for him. Would he forever remain trapped amidst his books and the dusty relics of a regrettable past? She sincerely hoped not, because her admiration for him had grown immensely. Wrapping the covers snugly around her chin, she gazed sleepily at the glowing remnants of the fire in the hearth. Enveloped by the tranquil silence of their home, she drifted off into another night's slumber. Throughout the chilly embrace of winter, Camille and Antoine found comfort in each other's company at the chateau, with Gabriel serving as their loyal link to the outside world. Many rooms within the sprawling mansion remained locked and untouched. The spaces they utilized for their daily routines were cozy and well kept, thanks to Camille's diligent care. Their meals were simple yet hearty. Outside, snow piled high in the courtyard, while cold winds occasionally whistled through deserted corridors. Yet, within the chateau's walls, its inhabitants huddled close to warm fireplaces, absorbed in their books and each other's quiet companionship. At last, the first whispers of spring graced the land. Camille received a letter from her father, sharing the joyful news that her eldest sister had found a suitor, and their wedding was to be held in just a few weeks. He kindly inquired if the Baron would permit her some time away to join in the celebrations at home. If granted, Laurent would be more than happy to come and escort her from the estate. When Camille brought this request to Antoine, he set down his book, looked at her with a gentle smile tinged with sadness, and replied, "Of course, she should go and take as much time as she needs." As she expressed her gratitude for his approval, she found herself once again not seeing a beast staring back at her, but rather a man. She blinked several times to clear away the lingering illusion. As she stepped out of the room, she paused for a moment, casting one last glance over her shoulder at him. Then she left him to his reading, tucking that moment away in her heart. Her journey to her sister's wedding and back was uneventful. Upon her return, family members greeted her with curiosity and perhaps a hint of newfound admiration. They admired the elegant new clothes she had purchased with her earnings. It was clear that the money she had been sending home had played a significant role in securing her sister's marriage. Though modest, this match lifted their family's image in the eyes of the villagers. They were no longer seen as impoverished, but viewed instead as stable and respectable due to Camille's steady income. Yet, despite this change in perception, Camille felt increasingly out of place in the family cottage. Even though she had spent all this time within the chateau walls, it seemed as though her perspective had shifted and her horizons broadened considerably. Sitting around the fire with her siblings, who were consumed by their own trivial worries, made her feel confined. She regretted having to part from her father once more, yet there was also a sense of relief when he bid farewell at Antoine's estate gates. She was ready to embrace her role as mistress of the house once again. However, that joy quickly faded into concern when she beheld the chaos that awaited her upon returning home. Gabriel answered the door with enthusiasm, clearly thrilled by her arrival. He leaned in close and whispered that nothing had been quite right since she had laughed last. Even the Baron was looking disheveled and hadn't left his library since she'd been gone. After tidying up her belongings, Camille made her way directly to Antoine. As she gently opened the door to the library, she was met with a scene of utter chaos. Books were scattered everywhere, some lying open in haphazard piles, while empty glasses cluttered the tables. Antoine slouched in a chair, appearing as though he hadn't changed his shirt in days. At the sound of her entrance, he looked up with a sheepish expression that hinted at relief. In that moment, Camille found herself seeing him simply as an ordinary man, and she struggled to reconcile this image with her previous perceptions. Logically, she recognized him as disheveled and unshaven, almost beastly, but her eyes seemed to deceive her. It took a moment for her vision to clear. Yes, there he was, clearly in need of some cheer. Within just a few days, Camille managed to restore order to the chaotic space. The dust and neglect of the past weeks were easily swept away, and Antoine's spirits lifted significantly upon her return. Yet, Gabriel confided in her that he wished she would leave again. He explained that the Baron had quickly fallen into a deep melancholy and had become utterly incapable of managing even the simplest tasks, including remembering to eat. However, with spring bursting forth across the estate, it was nearly impossible to remain sad for long. Camille was filled with delight as she had successfully organized the garden's cleanup before winter arrived. The courtyard was a breathtaking sight, showcasing the exquisite plants originally cultivated by Antoine's mother many years ago, now flourishing in their full splendor. A vibrant array of flowers blossomed gracefully, enhancing the beauty of the landscape. Each day seemed to bring an increasing number of birds, their melodious songs filling the mornings and inviting the residents of the chateau to bask in the garden's tranquility. Camille and Antoine began to savor their afternoon spent reading beneath the pergola, often allowing Gabriel to finish his chores early so they could unwind together. Camille also relished the moments when she could open the windows of the once stuffy mansion, welcoming fresh air into their home. Life across the estate felt revitalized, as if a new chapter was unfolding. As summer drew near, Camille received another letter from her father announcing her sister's forthcoming wedding. She found herself torn between her sense of duty to attend this family celebration and her desire not to part from Antoine again. To navigate this quandary, she proposed a unique solution. He would join her at the wedding and stay at a nearby inn. Antoine was initially taken aback by this suggestion, concerned about how others might view him. Camille reassured him that her village was far enough away that no one would have preconceived notions about him. In her eyes, he was no longer a monster, but rather a wise and gentle man whom she cherished deeply. She believed that her community would welcome him with open arms. The thought of a nobleman attending a village wedding did not trouble Camille. She had long since stopped viewing Antoine as a beast or merely a baron. Despite his initial hesitation, Antoine eventually consented to accompany Camille to the wedding, wanting to ensure she wouldn't miss out on celebrating her sister's special day. However, he remained somewhat anxious during the preparations, his mood noticeably somber. Undaunted by his apprehension, Camille arranged for Gabriel to visit a local tailor and have a new suit crafted for Antoine, one that fit impeccably. She had observed that he was still wearing outdated garments from years gone by. The latest fashion favored cleaner lines and simpler designs, and she wished for him to possess an outfit that would present him as dignified and contemporary rather than an echo from another time. The rooms they had occupied were tidied up, and the carriage was polished to a shine. At last, the day arrived when Gabriel bid farewell to the couple as they set off on their adventure. It was the first time he had witnessed the Baron departing from the estate. He assured them that he would take care of everything while they were away. The journey to Camille's village was quick, completed in just one day, which happened to be a splendid one. Summer was in full bloom, showcasing its vibrant beauty as the horse trotted along the winding road through the forest. Sunlight danced joyfully through the leafy canopy above, casting warm rays upon their path and whispering sweetly in the gentle breeze. At first, Antoine remained quiet, seemingly hesitant about being seen with Camille in public. However, after a few miles, he began discussing a book that Camille had been reading. Before long, their familiar playful banter returned. Camille smiled inwardly as she watched his charming qualities come to life. From her vantage point beside him, she could almost convince herself that she was sitting next to a true gentleman, and she decided to savor this delightful illusion. Eventually, their enjoyable journey reached its conclusion. As dusk fell and crickets began their evening serenade in the fields, Antoine and Camille arrived at her family's cottage and brought the carriage to a halt before stepping down from their seats. Her entire family stood waiting at the door, with her 4 unmarried siblings casting curious glances at them. Laurent made an effort to appear composed as he stepped forward to greet Antoine warmly, thanking him for accompanying Camille and honoring them with his presence. Yet Camille felt heat rise to her cheeks when her brother leaned over and whispered something teasingly to her older sister, prompting a giggle from her sibling. It was clear they were making light-hearted jokes about the Baron. A collective sigh of relief filled the air when Antoine took his leave for his lodgings. Inside, Camille allowed herself to be guided into the home where she spent the evening chatting with Laurent and her siblings about the upcoming wedding preparations. Still, worry tugged at her heart as she thought of Antoine alone at the inn. She hoped he was being treated kindly there. As she rested her head on her pillow that night, thoughts of him lingered heavily in her mind. She understood that a sense of relief would wash over her once the wedding was behind them and they returned to the chateau, a place she now regarded as her true home. The atmosphere grew heavy when he arrived at the church the next day for the ceremony. It was clear that Camille's worries had come to life. They sat in quietude throughout the service, both acutely aware of the weighty stares from the congregation. The small church felt even more confined with everyone's eyes fixed on them. The celebration after the ceremony unfolded on the village green. Though modest, it buzzed with energy, featuring punch, cakes, and vibrant wildflowers. Amidst this joyful scene, groups of ladies gathered, savoring sweets with grace, while children dashed across the lawn, delighting in an afternoon filled with play. Yet Camille and Antoine found themselves feeling disconnected from the merriment around them. She stood stiffly beside him, acknowledging the villagers who had once shown her warmth. Those friendly faces that had taught her about gardening and baking years ago now seemed distant. They whispered among themselves and exchanged knowing glances in her direction. Not a single neighbor offered a kind word to Antoine, who maintained a polite smile but chose not to speak. Her own family offered no solace either, completely overlooking the couple as they navigated through this challenging moment. As Camille and Antoine stood there, desperately wishing for the gathering to come to an end, they caught snippets of a conversation between two men nearby. "You might have wealth," one man remarked with a sneer, "but no one would ever consider marrying him with a face like that." The other man laughed, replying, "It's a sad situation when you have to woo your own maid." Those words pushed Camille over the edge. Setting down her punch, she made her way to the center of the room and called for everyone's attention with a firm voice. "I convinced the Baron to join me here because I believed you all to be decent people," she proclaimed. "I was certain that his noble spirit and kindness would show you that he is not the monster you think he is. Yet I regret to say I was wrong. None of you are worthy of his respect. We will trouble you no longer. Let me be clear. Antoine is a better man than any of you could ever hope to be. I would choose him as my companion over each and every one of you any day, and that is the honest truth." The crowd fell silent, their eyes wide in disbelief as they shifted their gaze from Camille to Antoine and back again. When she turned to look at him, she was met with an unexpected sight. No longer did he appear as he once had. Instead, A strikingly handsome and dignified man stood before her, smiling gratefully in her direction. No matter how hard she tried to refocus her vision or clear her thoughts, his appearance remained unchanged. His strong features, well-groomed beard, and impressive stature were gone. He now looked as charming as any man she'd ever known, and that transformation held steady. Whether it was merely a change in perspective, or perhaps some kind of enchantment at play, the other guests continued their revelry as if nothing had happened. They greeted Antoine warmly and smiled at Camille as though everything was perfectly normal, as if the earlier incident had never occurred at all. The villagers acted as if they had never encountered a beast among them before. It was a moment both perplexing and wondrous. A curtain had been drawn back forever, revealing the truth. This serene instant of victory signified Antoine's ultimate liberation from the spell that had bound him for so long. For many years, he had immersed himself in the wisdom contained within his library, searching for answers. Yet he had misjudged the woman who had cast her curse upon him. The solitary years spent nurturing kindness, generosity, and forgiveness had shaped within him the humanity that won Camille's heart. This newfound essence was the key that shattered his enchantment. Soon after, Camille and Antoine found themselves seated beneath the pergola in his garden, admiring the vibrant rose bush that belonged to his mother, now flourishing once more. As twilight enveloped the chateau, crickets began their evening serenade. The joyful couple basked in the warmth of a summer night, and Camille gazed at Antoine, marveling at the handsome visage that had previously been hidden beneath a beastly exterior. As she watched him, Antoine straightened his posture and pulled from his pocket the ring she had once admired in his mother's dresser. "You were the only one who truly endeavored to understand me," he told her earnestly. Then, with a familiar flair, he quoted from one of his countless books. As Copernicus said, "Everything revolves around the sun. You have become my sun." With a playful wink, he added, "In truth, I believe you are more than capable of managing this chateau." Camille chuckled and nodded in agreement as he gently slid the sparkling blue gem onto her finger. Staring at it in wonderment, she recalled the first time she had discovered it nestled among elegant dresses and other jewels in that enigmatic bedroom. It shimmered under the sunlight, as if whispering a cherished secret to her. Now she was becoming part of this estate's rich tapestry. Before summer slipped away entirely, Antoine and Camille exchanged their vows in the chateau's courtyard, surrounded by fragrant blooming roses and the sweet melodies of birds perched high in the trees. Standing in the shadow of their home, Camille looked at Antoine with a heart brimming with gratitude. She felt an undeniable sense of belonging in a place that had once felt foreign to her. This was no longer the desolate abode she had encountered just a year prior. Through love, patience, and a thirst for knowledge, she and Antoine had unearthed true happiness together.